What happens when a same-sex romance that started as a dream descends into public humiliation and heartache? They walked down the aisle, exchanged vows with a kiss in front of hundreds of people, confident that their love would last. But just a few years later, the fairy tale is shattered. Broken promises, shattered hopes, and a shaken faith in love. This story is not just about a broken marriage, but about daring to love openly, enduring judgment, and finding yourself through pain. Edison Fan was born in Nanjing, China, where tradition runs deep and silence often speaks louder than words. As a child, he grew up in an environment where obedience was prized and conformity felt like the safest path. He loved to draw, to dance, to dream, yet even then, he sensed he was different. In China, in the 1980s and 1990s, difference wasn't celebrated. It was feared, judged, and often hidden away. From a young age, Edison carried a quiet truth. He felt drawn to other boys, a flicker of affection he dared not name. At school, he laughed when others laughed. He played when others played. But behind that mask was a secret he believed no one would understand. In textbooks, in the media, in hushed adult conversations, homosexuality was never framed as love. It was spoken of as deviance, something shameful, even a disease. Imagine being a teenager, heart pounding at the sight of someone, only to be told that your feelings were wrong. That was the weight he carried. His family, like many traditional Chinese families, wanted the best for him: success, stability, respect. That path led him to New Zealand to study civil engineering. For his parents, it promised a prestigious, predictable future. For Edison, New Zealand became more than a place of study. It was the backdrop to an awakening. In a society more open than the one he had left, he began to glimpse a world where two men could walk side by side without fear, where love could be expressed openly, even celebrated. In New Zealand, he finally dared to look in the mirror and whisper the words he had long avoided. "I am gay." 3 small words, heavy with consequence. Terror, because he knew what they meant against the gravity of his upbringing. Rejection, judgment, perhaps abandonment. Relief, because for the first time, he was no longer lying to himself. At 22, inspired by Ellen DeGeneres' public courage, he made a bold decision: to come out. It wasn't an easy declaration. Coming out meant standing against decades of silence, centuries of cultural pressure. In many Asian communities, family honor can eclipse individual truth. To say "I am gay" was to reveal himself and risk bringing shame to the family name. These were the scales he weighed: personal freedom against expectation, love against tradition. Yet inside him burned a desire stronger than fear, the longing to be loved in daylight. He dreamed of a relationship not built in shadows, not maintained by excuses or lies. He imagined holding another man's hand without looking over his shoulder, kissing the person he loved without bracing for ridicule. Simple wishes to some, extraordinary in his world. Every great story has a hinge, a moment when the heart chooses between the known and the unknown. For Edison, that moment arrived at 22. By choosing to live openly, he wasn't merely shaping his own future. He was stepping onto a path that would, in time, make him a quiet beacon for countless others across Asia. And courage, he learned, rarely comes without cost. Honesty can be a lonely room. Friends drifted, conversations cooled, certain relatives wouldn't meet his eyes. The world didn't change simply because he spoke the truth. But something within him did. When he stripped away fear, when he stopped pretending, space opened for love to enter, cautiously at first, then with a steadier light. There were small, private milestones: 2 men holding hands on a lamplit street, a cafe where no one stared, a late-night bus ride where he let his head rest back and, just for a moment, breathed. He began to collect these scenes, a mosaic of ordinary freedoms that felt, to him, revolutionary. With every step, the shame he had been taught began to loosen its grip. This first chapter isn't about fame or fashion or marriage. It's about truth, about a young man discovering that authenticity is worth the risk of rejection. That love, even when it begins in whispers, demands to be lived out loud. It's about planting seeds of tenderness, resolve, and hope for a story larger than himself. A story of love, loss, and resilience that would one day speak to a generation. Years later, when he looks back on that mirror in a quiet student flat, the trembling breath, the barely audible words, he understands. The moment he chose himself, he changed the ending. Not the world all at once, not the hearts of others overnight, but the course of his own life. And from that choice, everything else, every bruise, every breakthrough, every tender beginning, would find its way to him, one honest day at a time. Because from the very beginning, Edison Fan has shown himself to be one of the countless young Asians who dare to be true to themselves, dare to embrace the truth instead of being silent. Don't you think so? And as you listen to this story, tell me, where in the world are you watching this video? But every awakening, every act of courage eventually leads to a crossroad where the heart is tested by love. For Edison Fan, that test came in the form of a man named Josh Taylor, the first great love of his life, and the man who would walk with him into the most public chapter of his early adulthood. They met in New Zealand, far from the traditions of Nanjing, in a land where the winds of freedom seemed to whisper possibilities he had never known back home. Josh was kind, open, and warm, the sort of person who carried ease in his laughter and safety in his presence. For Edison, who had spent so many years hiding, Josh represented something radical, the chance to love without a mask. Their relationship blossomed in the glow of honesty. Simple moments, holding hands in a cafe, whispering jokes on a bus, watching the ocean under a cloudy sky, felt extraordinary because they were lived openly. Edison was no longer just dreaming of love. He was living it. For the first time, he experienced what it meant to be truly seen by another person, and to be embraced fully for who he was. As their love deepened, they made a choice that would mark history. Not history on the scale of nations, but the intimate history of two people daring to defy expectations. In 2012, Edison and Josh married in New Zealand, one of the few countries at the time where same-sex marriage was legally recognized. The ceremony was small yet profound. Family, friends, and strangers alike bore witness as Edison and Josh exchanged vows, sealing them with a kiss. For Edison, a man of Chinese heritage, this was no small act. It was a declaration, not only of love but of existence. Imagine the scene. Two men walking down the aisle, hand in hand, hearts racing but faces glowing. In that moment, they weren't statistics. They weren't stereotypes. They were simply two human beings promising to spend their lives together. For Edison, it felt like stepping into a dream that once seemed unreachable. Their marriage became a beacon for many in the LGBTQ+ community, especially in Asia, where same-sex unions were still either stigmatized or outright banned. Pictures of them together, smiling on vacations, enjoying quiet dinners, celebrating birthdays, began to circulate online. For many, Edison's openness was revolutionary. He became living proof that love, even love between two men, could look ordinary, domestic, joyful. There were weekends filled with laughter, mornings spent planning their future, nights when the world outside seemed to fade and only their shared heartbeat mattered. They built routines like any other couple. Grocery shopping, choosing furniture, even arguing over the little things. What color curtains to buy, who should cook dinner, how to spend the holidays. In those everyday moments, Edison found a happiness he had once thought was reserved only for others. To outsiders, their life resembled a fairy tale. A young, handsome couple, openly in love, daring to create a home in a world that still questioned their right to exist. But to Edison, it was more than appearances. It was redemption. For the boy who once sat in a classroom in China, terrified of his own heartbeat, now to stand as a married man was nothing short of miraculous. And yet, what made this chapter so powerful was not only the romance itself, but the symbolism it carried. Edison's wedding was a statement to every closeted young man or woman watching from afar. You are not alone. Your love is not impossible. Each photo of his wedding day, each smile captured, was a quiet revolution against shame. The years that followed were filled with memories that glistened like fragments of a dream. They traveled together, took photos by the sea, celebrated milestones with friends. Edison shared glimpses of their life on social media, not for validation, but as a way to normalize what had once been hidden. He wanted the world to see that gay love could be as real, as messy, and as beautiful as any other. To watch them was to believe in love again. For those who stumbled upon their story online, it was like opening the pages of a modern romance novel, except this one was real. Edison and Josh weren't characters in a movie, they were flesh and blood, and their love was proof that sometimes dreams do come true. But underneath the fairy tale, the truth remained fragile. Every love story, no matter how radiant, carries the weight of human imperfection. Their journey, though filled with light, also carried shadows that would eventually test their bond. Still, in those early years, Edison held on to one unshakable truth. For a moment in time, he had everything he had ever dreamed of. And perhaps that is the essence of this chapter. Not an end, but a beginning. The courage to love, the audacity to marry, the beauty of building a life together when the world still whispers no. Edison's first marriage may not have lasted forever, but it gave him something invaluable. The knowledge that his love was true, his heart was worthy, and his truth was worthy of being seen in the light. So what can we learn from this part of his journey? That sometimes, even when love doesn't last, it still matters. A brief marriage can still change lives, his own and the lives of those who see themselves reflected in his story. Edison Fan's first great love wasn't just about two men. It was about a community that watched, learned, and dared to believe. Because love, whether it lasts a lifetime or a moment, has the power to transform us. It can break chains, erase shame, and inspire courage. And for Edison, that first great love, that first open marriage, was the spark that lit the way for everything that followed. But every fairy tale has its dark side, and every love story, no matter how bright, can be tested by time. After years of laughter, quiet dinners, and dreams of eternal life, cracks began to appear. By 2015, what had seemed like a miracle was unraveling. Edison Fan and Josh Taylor, the couple who had walked down the aisle with courage and burning hope, now faced the unthinkable: divorce. The announcement shocked many. To the outside world, Edison's marriage seemed to prove that true love could triumph over prejudice. To those who had followed his journey, their union was a symbol of possibility. But love, whether gay or straight, was still love. It was vulnerable, fragile, and wounded. Behind the carefully crafted photos and carefully curated moments is the raw truth of two people who cannot hold on. For Edison, the breakup was more than a private pain. It was a public breakdown. He had built his image on honesty, sharing life's moments openly, and now that openness had exposed him. Every rumor, every online comment, every judgment from strangers was like a knife cutting into his fragile heart. He turned to social media to express his pain. The words he wrote were heavy with pain. The loss of love, the emptiness of a home once filled with laughter, the unbearable silence after a broken vow. For a man who had kissed his husband under the eyes of hundreds of people, it now felt like those very eyes were watching him, waiting to see if he would collapse. The pain was compounded by the society around him. In parts of Asia, where homosexuality was still viewed harshly, Edison's divorce was not simply seen as the end of a relationship, but was used as a weapon. Critics taunted him, saying that his marriage was doomed from the start, that same-sex love could never last. For Edison, each insult brought back the fear he had felt as a boy in China. He had fought so hard to prove his love was real, and now the world seemed to use that pain as evidence against him. There is a special cruelty to losing love when that love was once an act of defiance. For Edison, the collapse of his marriage felt like a betrayal, not just by Josh, but by the very dream he had believed in. The nights became endless, the days faded. He describes it as standing in the ruins of something he once thought impregnable. But then, in that rubble, something else began to form. Pain can be destructive, but it can also open up space for growth. In the calm after the storm, Edison began to realize that his story was not defined by the failure of a marriage, but by the courage to love openly in the first place. The wound was deep, yes, but within that wound was evidence of his humanity. His divorce reminded the world of an often forgotten truth. Same-sex couples are not immune to suffering. Love is not a political symbol, not an idealized fantasy. It is messy, fragile, and sometimes broken. By living in her pain publicly, Edison has shown that LGBTQ+ love is just as real, complex, and vulnerable as any other kind of love. For those who observe from afar, Edison's pain is strangely liberating. It shatters the stereotype that same-sex love must be perfect to be worthy. It shows that sincerity is not about never failing. It's about daring to try, knowing that you might fall. Edison's pain is harsh, but also transformative. From it, he finally finds a strength he didn't know he had. And perhaps that's the lesson hidden in the silences of this chapter. That even in pain, there is meaning. That to love, to lose, to grieve, is to live fully. Edison's story is now not about triumph. It's about perseverance. About overcoming the weight of judgment, the cruelty of strangers, and the silence of an empty house, and still finding the courage to go on. So as you listen to this part of his journey, let me ask you, how did you feel after hearing about his broken marriage? Did you only see the pain, or did you also see the resilience it inspired? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your voice, your perspective, will become a part of this story too. But love did not end with heartbreak. For Edison, pain did not close his heart. It opened an entirely new chapter, love for a little life. After experiencing the losses of marriage, he chose to place his heart into the journey of fatherhood. In 2017, through surrogacy, Edison welcomed the birth of his son Frederick, a child who brought him light and hope. From that moment on, Edison's love was no longer centered only on a partner or a lover, but rose into a sacred paternal bond. A gay man, single, raising his child with a wide-open heart. This image moved millions and changed the way people looked at love and family. To many, it was a surprise. A single gay man, still scarred by a broken marriage, suddenly deciding to raise a child on his own. But for Edison, the decision was not sudden. It was the culmination of years of yearning. He had always dreamed of a family, but life had shown him that family did not have to look like tradition. If romantic love had broken his heart, perhaps fatherhood could heal it. The first time Edison held Frederick, he felt something change. All the noise of the world, the criticism, the gossip, the shame was silenced. In his arms was a new beginning, fragile yet strong, demanding yet full of promise. The tiny heartbeat seemed to answer every doubt he had ever harbored. Yes, he was good enough. Yes, he could love again. Yes, this love would not betray him. But being a single father was not easy. Nights that should have been filled with parties or quiet dinners with his partner were now filled with sleepless nights and bottles. There were diapers to change, tears to soothe, and endless worries about the future. Would his son face bullying because of who his father was? Will society's judgment fall on this innocent child? Edison carried these questions with him, but he also had the strength to face them. Because in his role as a father, Edison found redemption. Every laugh from Frederick, every milestone, his first steps, his first words, became a stitch to patch up the wounds left by divorce. Edison learned to find joy in the little things. Cooking breakfast while Frederick played on the kitchen floor, telling bedtime stories that ended with a whispered "I love you," capturing candid moments that no one else saw. These were images of love that didn't need to be flaunted on social media because they were forever etched in his heart. Of course, not everyone understood. Some questioned his decision. Others thought he was selfish for bringing a child into an unconventional family. In some corners of society, whispers rang out, "A homosexual man can't be a father. A child needs a mother." But Edison had learned long ago that silence helps no one. He responded not with arguments, but with love. Every day that Frederick grew up healthy, happy, and loved was proof enough. In this chapter of his life, Edison no longer sought recognition from the outside world. His focus shifted from public recognition to private devotion. He didn't need applause for his courage or sympathy for his suffering. What he needed was to show his son a life built on honesty. To prove to Frederick that love, in all its forms, was real, and that even when a marriage falls apart, love endures. For Edison, fatherhood was more than raising a child. It was about regaining faith in love. It's the realization that the strongest relationships aren't always romantic. Sometimes they're familial, built on patience, sacrifice, and unconditional care. Through fatherhood, he rewrote his story. From the ashes of a broken marriage rose the strength of a devoted father. And perhaps this is where his story becomes universal. Because who among us hasn't faced loss? Who hasn't wondered if we could love again? Edison's answer didn't lie in the arms of another man, at least not yet. It lay in the heartbeat of his child. So now, as you reflect on this chapter in his journey, let me ask you, how do you feel about Edison's decision to become a father after his heartbreak? Do you see courage, sacrifice, or something else entirely? And one more thing, we'd love to know, what country are you watching this video in? Leave a comment below and we'll get back to you. But life has a way of surprising us. Just when we think the story has settled, another chapter opens with new light. After years of being a single father, pouring his heart into raising his son and healing from the scars of a broken marriage, Edison Fan was no longer searching for love. He had found fulfillment in fatherhood, stability in routine, and courage in living authentically. Yet as fate often writes it, love has a way of appearing when you least expect it. And that love came in the form of Rob Seo, a South Korean model whose presence would transform Edison's story into something close to a fairy tale. Their first meeting was almost cinematic. Two men from different backgrounds, Edison from China, Rob from Korea, crossing paths in a world where the odds seemed stacked against them. What began as a conversation soon unfolded into something more profound. A recognition, a spark, the kind of connection that makes the world suddenly feel smaller and infinitely more beautiful. Edison, who had once wondered if his heart could love again after divorce, now found it beating with new life. For Rob, Edison wasn't just another person in the modeling and fashion world. He was a man who had lived, who had hurt, who had dared to love publicly and suffered for it, but who still carried a tenderness that drew people in. And for Edison, Rob represented possibility. Not just a partner, but a companion who understood what it meant to love boldly in a society that still too often whispered disapproval. Their love story blossomed not in secrecy, but in the open air of the digital age. Photos of them began to appear on Instagram. laughing together on a quiet afternoon, holding hands on city streets, sharing meals that looked as joyful as they felt. To the outside world, these were snapshots. To them, they were declarations. In every picture, in every smile, Edison and Rob were telling the world, "Our love is real, our love is here, and it deserves to be seen." There was something extraordinary in their ordinariness. They weren't trying to perform perfection. They showed the simple human side of love. Two men teasing each other over coffee, celebrating milestones with friends, traveling with Edison's son, building not just a relationship, but the shape of a family. For those watching, it was as though Edison had been given a second chance at love. And this time, the universe had matched him with someone who fit like a missing piece. And then came the moment that would forever be etched into their story. The proposal. June 20th, 24, Paris. The City of Lights, long known as the City of Lovers, became the stage for one of the most romantic scenes of Edison's life. There, beneath the Parisian sky, Rob knelt down and asked the question that carried the weight of their journey. "Will you marry me?" Imagine the scene. The Eiffel Tower in the distance, the glow of evening lights reflecting on the Seine, and two men, Asian men, who had carried the weight of cultural silence, embracing in front of the world. When Edison said yes, it wasn't just an answer to Rob. It was an answer to every young person who had ever wondered if true love could be theirs. The photos of their proposal flooded social media, sparking headlines, drawing congratulations from across the globe. What might once have been scandalous in parts of Asia was now celebrated as a triumph of love. For Edison, that moment in Paris was not just about personal happiness, it was about vindication. Years earlier, his first marriage had ended in heartbreak, and critics had used it to argue that same-sex love was doomed to fail. Now, standing hand in hand with Rob, Edison embodied the truth. Love can fall apart, but it can also rise again, stronger, deeper, and more enduring than before. The image of Edison and Rob in Paris became more than a romantic milestone. It became a symbol. Two Asian men, Chinese and Korean, defying borders, defying prejudice, and standing in the open as a couple. It was, in many ways, the pinnacle of Edison's journey. From the frightened boy in Nanjing who hid his heart, to the young man in New Zealand who dared to come out, to the husband whose marriage crumbled, to the father who found redemption in raising a son, and finally to the man who found love again in the most magical of places. For those who followed Edison's story, this chapter felt like a dream fulfilled. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. It showed that even after loss, after shame, after being broken, love can still find its way back. And sometimes it arrives more beautifully than before. So what can we take away from this chapter? Fairy tales aren't just for movies or novels. They can happen to real people. People who have suffered, people who have been judged, people who have been rejected all their lives. Edison and Rob's love story is a reminder that love isn't a privilege of a few, but a right for everyone. And if this story touches your heart, inspires you, or makes you believe in love more, we invite you to support our channel. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because we'll continue to bring you more stories of courage, resilience, and love that deserve to be heard. Your support means a lot, and it helps us share these voices with more people around the world. And so after Paris, after the fairy tale proposal under the city lights, Edison Fan's story comes full circle. From the trembling boy in Nanjing who feared his own heartbeat, to the young man in New Zealand who whispered, "I'm gay," into the mirror, to the brave husband who married, to the grieving man who openly mourned, to the devoted father who found salvation in his son, and finally, to the partner who found love again with Rob Seo. His journey is a tapestry woven with threads of both pain and beauty. This is not just a man's romantic story. It is a chronicle of courage. It is a story of how love, even when it hurts, finds a way to heal. It reminds us that scars are not the end of the story, but proof that we have lived, loved, and endured. In each chapter of Edison's life, love takes on a different shape. First, the innocent thrills of youth, a secret too heavy for a boy to bear. Then the bright glow of first love and marriage, a dream come true until it was no more. Then the dark valley of pain, where the promise of eternal life collapses and the judgment of the world weighs like a storm. And from there, rebirth, fatherhood, where love is no longer passion but sacrifice. Finally, finding romance again in the arms of Rob Seo, proving that second chances do exist, and sometimes love comes more tenderly, more resiliently, and more brilliantly than before. When you step back and see the big picture, it is breathtaking. Edison Fan's life reminds us that love is never one-sided. It can lift us to the sky, and it can also bring us down. It can hurt, and it can also heal. It can frustrate us, and it can also save us. To deny that truth is to deny what it means to be human. And perhaps that is why Edison resonates with so many people across Asia. In societies where silence often suffocates, where family honor can obscure personal truth, he chose to be true to himself. He chose presence over invisibility, authenticity over ease. In doing so, he became something greater than himself. A mirror for those still hiding, a beacon for those still afraid, and a symbol of possibility for those wondering whether their love can withstand the weight of judgment. Edison Fan was not perfect, and he did not claim to be. His marriage was broken. His heart was broken. He was criticized, ridiculed, misunderstood. But through it all, he never stopped believing in love. That persistence, that refusal to give up on love's ability to surprise and renew, is what makes him extraordinary. He shows us that resilience is not about never falling, but about rising again and again, with an open heart. The truth is, same-sex love is no different than any other love. It carries with it the sweetness of intimacy, the pain of loss, the tenderness of family, the joy of commitment. It deserves to be cherished, recognized, and celebrated no less. And Edison's journey is a living testament to that truth. Today, as a father, a fiancé, and an openly gay public figure, Edison Fan is one of Asia's most prominent LGBTQ+ icons. His story isn't just about him. It's about all the young men and women who watch from the shadows, wondering if their lives could be different. It shows them that, yes, love is possible. Yes, family is possible. Yes, happiness is possible. And perhaps most importantly, Edison's story teaches us that vulnerability is not weakness. Loving openly in a world that won't let you, that's strength. Crying openly, grieving honestly, rebuilding your life in the light of day. These are acts of defiance as powerful as any protest. Because in the end, nothing shatters stereotypes like living a life of love without regret. So what can we, the listeners, take away from this journey? That love in all its forms is worth the risk. That even when it hurts, even when it ends, even when it seems impossible, love is still the most transformative force we have. And now, as we close this chapter, we turn the question to you. How do you feel after hearing Edison Fan's story? Do you admire him, criticize him, or simply see yourself reflected in him? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your voice matters. Tell us, do you consider Edison Fan a true symbol of love and resilience in Asia? Edison Fan's story is not only about love gained and lost, but also about courage, resilience, and the power of being true to yourself. Through joy, pain, fatherhood, and second chances, he reminds us that love, in any form, is always worth fighting for. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to support us. Your presence means a lot, and we are truly grateful.